Next to me is obviously a replica of the Rosetta Stone. The real Rosetta Stone would be way too heavy to put on this table. It's usually on display in Gallery 4 in the Sculpture Gallery, but is currently visible in the exhibition that I'm working on, Hieroglyphs Unlocking Ancient Egypt. You probably know that the Rosetta Stone helped us to decipher ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, but the Rosetta Stone is a modern name. The ancient Egyptians, of course, would not have called it like this. They would probably have just called it a decree.
When Zahi Hawass stepped forward to speak about the Rosetta Stone, it was not just another lecture by a famed archaeologist. Hawass, whose voice has long carried the weight of Egyptian history and whose passion for the preservation of antiquities has shaped global understanding of ancient civilizations, approached the subject with a rare intensity. The Rosetta Stone, long admired as the key that unlocked the secrets of Egyptian hieroglyphs, suddenly became more than an artifact. It became the centerpiece of a narrative Hawass sought to reshape, a truth hidden beneath centuries of scholarly reverence and colonial possession. His revelations about the stone did not simply retell what had already been known. They challenged assumptions, reframed interpretations, and breathed new complexity into one of the most celebrated discoveries in modern archaeology. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The Rosetta Stone itself has always carried an aura of mystery and importance. Discovered by French soldiers in 1799 during Napoleon's campaign in Egypt, the basalt slab contained inscriptions in 3 scripts: hieroglyphic, Demotic, and Greek. It was this trilingual nature that allowed scholars, most notably Jean-François Champollion, to decipher hieroglyphs in the 19th century. Yet for decades, the stone has been celebrated primarily as a European triumph of linguistic brilliance rather than as an Egyptian relic whose cultural meaning extended far beyond translation. Hawass, in his revelation, shifted the focus back to Egypt itself, reframing the Rosetta Stone not just as a tool for decipherment, but as a historical document of immense political and cultural resonance. One of the shocking truths he emphasized was that the stone was never created for posterity as a linguistic bridge. It was a decree issued during the reign of Ptolemy V in 196 BCE, carved to cement political legitimacy in a time of unrest. The text praised the king, extolling his generosity toward temples and his efforts to stabilize the land, even as Egypt was caught between internal rebellions and foreign pressures. According to Hawass, the real significance of the stone was not that it held the key to unlocking hieroglyphs centuries later, but that it served as an overt piece of political propaganda. Its trilingual inscriptions were not an attempt at cultural inclusivity, as once romanticized, but rather a necessity born from Egypt's fractured society. The priests and elite used hieroglyphs, the administrators employed Demotic, and the ruling Greek elites needed their own language represented. This, Hawass argued, revealed a divided Egypt where communication between rulers and subjects required 3 voices on a single slab. By underlining this truth, Hawass shifted attention away from European scholarship and back toward Egypt's historical reality. The Rosetta Stone became not only a linguistic marvel, but a mirror reflecting Egypt's struggle with identity under foreign rule. This repositioning shook conventional narratives because for too long the stone was hailed merely as an academic tool for outsiders, rather than as an Egyptian artifact that documented a society under tension. For Hawass, this was an act of reclaiming history, reminding the world that the stone was not a trophy of intellectual conquest, but a deeply Egyptian creation with profound implications. Another revelation he underscored was about the stone's journey out of Egypt. When the British defeated the French in 1801, they seized the stone and transported it to London, where it has remained in the British Museum ever since. While this fact is well known, Hawass framed it differently. He pointed out that the removal of the stone was not just an act of war spoils, but also the beginning of a long tradition of Western institutions hoarding Egyptian antiquities under the guise of preservation. By highlighting this, he connected the stone's history to broader debates about cultural restitution. For Egyptians, the Rosetta Stone has become a symbol of cultural displacement, a relic that not only tells the story of ancient Egypt but also embodies the colonial extraction of heritage. Hawass's framing made clear that the Rosetta Stone is more than an object of study. It is a contested emblem of ownership and identity. The shocking truth, then, was not only in what the stone originally represented, but also in what its modern history reveals about power dynamics between nations. For Egypt, reclaiming the Rosetta Stone would not just be about returning a rock, it would be about restoring dignity, acknowledging a past stripped away by colonial powers, and asserting control over its own narrative. Hawass, by speaking so directly, placed the stone at the heart of Egypt's demand for cultural justice. The implications of these revelations are vast. By repositioning the stone as a political decree rather than a serendipitous gift to linguists, Hawass encouraged a reconsideration of Egyptian history itself. It showed that ancient texts, often romanticized as timeless wisdom, were also deeply embedded in the struggles of their own eras. The Rosetta Stone, rather than being an impartial relic, was a voice of propaganda crafted to shape perception. This forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that history, even in its earliest inscriptions, was manipulated by power structures. Such a perspective destabilizes the traditional reverence for antiquities as purely objective witnesses of the past, and instead presents them as instruments of persuasion and control. Hawass also compelled audiences to rethink the relationship between Egypt and the Western world. For decades, the Rosetta Stone has stood in London as a centerpiece of the British Museum, admired by millions who often fail to see the irony. The most famous Egyptian artifact in the world is not in Egypt. By drawing attention to this, Hawass highlighted the imbalance of global heritage ownership, an imbalance rooted in conquest rather than mutual exchange. The truth he revealed was not just historical but political, resonating with debates across the globe about the return of looted artifacts. If the Rosetta Stone could be reinterpreted as a tool of propaganda in antiquity, then its very presence in Britain today could likewise be seen as a continuation of that same manipulation, an artifact serving narratives of power, control, and dominance, centuries after it was first carved. The energy of Hawass's revelations was not merely academic but deeply emotional. He spoke not just as a scholar but as a guardian of Egypt's past. His words carried a sense of urgency, as if the Rosetta Stone itself demanded to be understood differently. For Egyptians, the stone is not an abstract curiosity, it is a tangible connection to their ancestors, a piece of stone that carries voices silenced by time. To see it framed as a European achievement rather than an Egyptian relic is to witness their history distorted. Hawass sought to correct that distortion, and in doing so, he unsettled audiences who had grown comfortable with the prevailing narrative. What makes his revelations particularly striking is how they expose the tension between knowledge and ownership. The stone gave the world the ability to read hieroglyphs, opening vast libraries of Egyptian history to scholars everywhere. Yet, in providing that gift, Egypt was simultaneously stripped of its most iconic artifact. This paradox sits at the heart of Hawass's message. The world celebrates what the stone unlocked, while Egypt mourns what was lost. In articulating this, he forced his audience to confront an uncomfortable truth. The pursuit of knowledge is not always innocent, and sometimes it comes at the expense of the very cultures it seeks to understand. The Rosetta Stone, as reimagined through Hawass's revelations, becomes a symbol of duality. It is both a key to understanding and a reminder of manipulation, both a tool of propaganda in antiquity and a token of colonial possession in modernity. Its surface, covered in 3 scripts, speaks not only of languages but of divisions, tensions, and the struggle for legitimacy. Hawass's words pulled back the veil of romanticism, reminding us that history is never simple. Beneath the polished narratives lies a web of power, control, and identity that continues to resonate today. This new framing also alters how we perceive Champollion and the decipherment of hieroglyphs. While his brilliance cannot be denied, the revelation that the stone's original purpose was propaganda tempers the triumphalist view of linguistic conquest. It suggests that what Champollion unlocked was not just language, but the calculated rhetoric of rulers seeking to maintain control. The breakthrough remains monumental, but its context now feels more layered, more charged, more human. Hawass thus repositioned Champollion's achievement within the broader reality of Egypt's history, where the stone's words were never neutral but politically loaded. By stripping away the aura of neutrality, Hawass's revelations compel modern audiences to reflect on how we engage with antiquities in museums today. The Rosetta Stone behind its glass case in London is typically approached with quiet awe. Visitors snap photos, admire the carvings, and move on, rarely considering the political and cultural storm it represents. Hawass disrupted that ritual, urging people to see the stone as more than a relic frozen in time. It is alive with controversy, brimming with tension, and demanding recognition of the voices it silenced and the history it displaced. The implications ripple outward, challenging the ways museums curate and present artifacts. If the Rosetta Stone can be reinterpreted in this way, then how many other antiquities carry hidden truths beneath their celebrated narratives? How many objects presented as scientific curiosities were, in fact, tools of propaganda, instruments of domination, or symbols of identity crises? Hawass's revelations invite us to re-examine entire collections, to peel back the layers of interpretation imposed by centuries of scholarship, and to listen more closely to the artifacts themselves. For Egypt, this is not just an intellectual exercise, but a call to action. The Rosetta Stone embodies the ongoing struggle for cultural sovereignty, a struggle Hawass has long championed. By revealing its deeper truths, he strengthened Egypt's moral claim to its return. He reminded the world that the stone's story did not end with Champollion's decipherment or with its placement in London. Its story continues, and Egypt has the right to reclaim its voice within that story. What makes Hawass's revelations so powerful is their refusal to settle for easy answers. He did not simply retell the familiar tale of discovery and translation. He dismantled it, exposing its flaws and reassembling it in a way that foregrounds Egypt's lived reality. This act of reframing is itself revolutionary because it challenges audiences to shift their perspective. Instead of seeing the Rosetta Stone as a gift from history to Europe, we are now asked to see it as a voice from Egypt, distorted by power yet still speaking across the centuries. The shock of his truths lies not in the novelty of facts, but in the depth of reorientation. What we thought we knew about the stone becomes unstable, unsettled. It is not a passive artifact, but an active participant in history, a witness to propaganda, conquest, and cultural displacement. Hawass's words transform it from a relic of language to a symbol of struggle, a symbol that continues to matter in the present. In his revelation, the Rosetta Stone became more than an object. It became a story of Egypt's resilience, of its ongoing battle to assert ownership over its past, and of the world's responsibility to listen more carefully to the voices embedded in stone. That is the enduring power of Hawass's truth. It reminds us that history is not finished, that artifacts are not silent, and that the past still speaks, often in ways that unsettle and provoke. Through his voice, the Rosetta Stone has been reframed for a new generation, one that must grapple not only with the marvels of ancient Egypt, but also with the responsibilities of acknowledging how those marvels have been treated. The shock lies not in discovering that the stone was propaganda, nor in recognizing its colonial journey, but in realizing how long these truths were overshadowed by a single narrative of European triumph. Hawass shattered that narrative, returning the stone to Egypt, not physically but symbolically, through the power of truth. And so, the Rosetta Stone now stands at a crossroads of interpretation. On one side lies the familiar tale of decipherment and linguistic triumph, a story cherished by the West for centuries. On the other lies the narrative Hawass has brought forth, a tale of propaganda, division, and cultural displacement. Both are true, but it is the second that adds depth, complexity, and moral urgency. It is the second that forces us to look again at the black basalt surface and see not only the carved words, but also the shadows of power that shaped them. Hawass revealed that the Rosetta Stone is not a relic to be passively admired, but a challenge to be reckoned with. It calls on us to confront the politics of history, the ethics of possession, and the resilience of culture. By unmasking its truths, he gave it back its voice, a voice that speaks not just of ancient kings, but of a modern Egypt demanding recognition. The stone is no longer silent, it speaks, and through Hawass's revelations, it demands to be heard. The auditorium where Zahi Hawass made his revelations about the Rosetta Stone had the atmosphere of an unveiling. Though the artifact itself remained encased within the British Museum in London, the weight of his words made it feel as though the stone had been placed before the audience in spirit, stripped of the layers of assumptions that had long surrounded it. Hawass's presence was commanding as always, with the intensity of a man who has spent his life in conversation with Egypt's past. The moment was charged not simply because he spoke of ancient history, but because he illuminated dimensions of the stone that had been invisible to many for centuries. In the hushed silence of those listening, one could sense the gravity of hearing truths that forced a recalibration of understanding. What emerged most vividly from his discourse was the idea that the stone is not frozen in antiquity, but has lived a life that stretches across epochs, each stage shaped by power, conquest, and perception. Hawass painted a vision of the stone as a traveler across time. A slab that began as a declaration to a divided Egyptian populace was then unearthed in the dust of Rashid during Napoleon's invasion, passed into the hands of Britain as a spoil of war, and finally became an icon in European scholarship. Each transformation was not incidental but part of a long trajectory in which the stone was used as a tool, both by those who inscribed it and those who later possessed it. This layering of uses and meanings makes the Rosetta Stone unique among antiquities. Hawass urged his listeners to appreciate the stone not as a neutral artifact but as an object in motion, one that has played active roles in shaping identities and histories. To him, the stone is a prism that refracts power at every turn. In its original context, it asserted the divinity and generosity of Ptolemy V to reassure a fractured society. In Napoleonic times, it became an emblem of intellectual conquest, a trophy of scientific discovery. In British hands, it transformed into a centerpiece of cultural authority, displayed as proof of Britain's ability to preserve and study the world's treasures. In every age, it has been far more than stone. It has been a stage upon which narratives of legitimacy and dominance were performed. This conception of the stone as a shifting symbol allowed Hawass to draw attention to how it reflects the fluidity of meaning itself. Archaeology often seeks to pin down objects, to categorize and fix them within timelines and typologies, but Hawass reminded his audience that artifacts breathe differently depending on who holds them and in what context they are encountered. The Rosetta Stone is not bound by its original decree, but has accumulated layers of significance that continue to evolve. This, he suggested, is both the gift and the burden of such a powerful relic. It cannot be confined to a single story. Among the most striking moments of Hawass's discourse was his evocation of the priesthood who commissioned the decree. In his telling, these were not passive scribes mechanically chiseling words into basalt, but political actors with a keen awareness of their fractured audience. They understood that Egyptian society at the time was not united under a single script or identity. The use of 3 languages was not an accident of convenience, but a deliberate strategy to ensure the widest possible reach of their message. By carving in hieroglyphs, they appealed to tradition and divine legitimacy. Through demotic, they spoke to the scribes and administrators who ran the machinery of daily governance. Through Greek, they addressed the ruling elite who held sway over the land. Each inscription was a thread in a web of persuasion crafted to weave together a society under strain. Hawass lingered on this point because it underscored how calculated and self-conscious the decree was. The stone was never meant to be admired by future generations for its beauty. It was meant to be read and believed, to embed in the minds of Egyptians the image of a benevolent ruler deserving loyalty. In this sense, it is one of the earliest surviving examples of what we might today call mass communication, a piece of political messaging carved in hard stone rather than printed on paper. This recognition reframed the stone not as an impartial record, but as a loudspeaker of power. From this realization came another thread in Hawass's argument. The Rosetta Stone is not merely an archaeological artifact, but a reminder of how rulers across time manipulate symbols to maintain authority. By situating the stone within this broader history of propaganda, he linked antiquity to the present. Just as modern leaders rely on media to shape public opinion, so too did Ptolemy V rely on stone and script. This parallel gave the stone a renewed immediacy, making it less an artifact trapped in the distant past and more a mirror reflecting practices that persist to this day. Hawass seemed to suggest that if we can learn to read the Rosetta Stone not as a relic but as a strategy, we may better understand the mechanics of power both ancient and modern. Beyond this political layer, Hawass's revelations delved into the artistry of translation itself. He pointed out that while scholars often celebrate the stone as the bridge to understanding hieroglyphs, it also reveals the compromises of translation. The 3 scripts were not identical mirror texts but carried subtle shifts, adaptations, and contextual adjustments. The Greek version emphasized certain virtues of the king in ways that resonated with Hellenistic norms, while the hieroglyphic version wrapped his authority in divine legitimacy more appropriate to Egyptian tradition. Even in antiquity, translation was not simply about rendering words across languages, but about tailoring messages for different audiences. This insight adds richness to the stone's significance. It's not just a trilingual inscription, but a tri-layered performance of persuasion. In re-examining the stone through these lenses, Hawass created a space for rethinking Egypt's role in the narrative. For too long, he argued, the story of the Rosetta Stone has been framed as one of European ingenuity, the triumph of Champollion and the brilliance of decipherment. While that achievement remains monumental, it has overshadowed the fact that the stone itself is Egyptian. It was Egyptians who inscribed it, Egyptians who lived under its decree, and Egyptians whose divided society necessitated its form. Hawass reclaimed the stone not by denying its role in Western scholarship, but by insisting that its Egyptian identity be foregrounded. In this reframing, Egypt was not a passive supplier of artifacts, but the active origin of a relic that shaped world history. Equally important in Hawass's revelations was his treatment of the stone's physical journey. While many know the bare fact that it was seized by the British after Napoleon's defeat, Hawass narrated this journey with a sense of violation and loss. He described how, once removed from its homeland, the stone was no longer merely displaced, but transformed into a symbol of Western dominance. Its presence in London was not incidental, it was strategic. It embodied the idea that the West had the authority to take, to study, and to own the world's most valuable cultural treasures. For Egyptians, this was not just theft, but erasure, a moment when their history was placed behind glass for others to interpret. By describing this act in visceral terms, Hawass emphasized the emotional weight that Egyptians attached to the stone. It is not simply another object among thousands taken abroad. It is the most visible emblem of their cultural disinheritance, a reminder that even the artifact that unlocked their ancestors' voices was silenced in their own land. This framing made clear that calls for the stone's return are not about logistics or museum collections, they are about dignity, sovereignty, and identity. The stone is a wound that remains open, and its presence in London is a constant reminder of that wound. Hawass also spoke about the aura of the stone within Egypt itself, had it remained in the land of its birth. He invited his audience to imagine what it would mean for Egyptians to stand before the Rosetta Stone in Cairo, not as tourists in a foreign museum, but as descendants confronting their own history. In his vision, the stone's return would transform it from a symbol of loss to one of restoration. It would allow Egyptians to reclaim not only an object, but a story. This imaginative exercise underscored the magnitude of its absence. The stone's displacement is not merely geographical, but spiritual, depriving Egypt of one of its most resonant voices. Another dimension Hawass introduced was the idea of the stone as a bridge, not just between languages, but between epochs. He suggested that the stone's layered journey reveals as much about modern history as about antiquity. To study it is to study the politics of empire, the arrogance of conquest, the hunger for knowledge, and the struggle for restitution. It is a nexus where multiple timelines intersect: the Ptolemaic period, the Napoleonic invasion, the colonial era, and the modern push for cultural justice. Few artifacts carry such a span of significance, and it is this breadth that makes the Rosetta Stone unique. As he spoke, Hawass made clear that this multi-temporal significance is precisely why the stone demands reinterpretation. If it remains confined to the single narrative of linguistic decipherment, its richness is diminished. But if we allow it to be seen in its full trajectory, from propaganda decree to colonial trophy to contested relic, its true power emerges. It becomes not only a story of the past, but a challenge for the present, forcing us to confront how we handle cultural heritage today. Perhaps the most provocative element of Hawass's revelation was his insistence that the Rosetta Stone story is still unfolding. He argued that history is not static, and artifacts continue to accrue meaning as they move through time. The Rosetta Stone, therefore, is not finished. Its future, whether it remains in London or returns to Egypt, will add yet another layer to its significance. If it stays, it will continue to embody the imbalance of cultural ownership. If it returns, it will become a symbol of restitution and justice. Either path will shape its meaning for generations to come. This framing leaves audiences with a sense of urgency. To understand the Rosetta Stone is not only to study what it once was, but to decide what it should be. Hawass's words made clear that we are not passive observers of history, but participants shaping its next chapter. The stone, carved more than 2,000 years ago, still demands choices of us today. In the wake of his revelations, the stone can no longer be approached with the same casual awe. To stand before it is to confront propaganda, conquest, and displacement all at once. It is to see not just ancient scripts, but the fingerprints of history's most powerful forces. Hawass's brilliance lay in making this truth undeniable, in forcing the world to see the stone as Egypt sees it, as both a treasure and a scar, both a gift to knowledge and a symbol of loss. The implications of this are profound, not only for Egypt but for the world's relationship with antiquity. If the Rosetta Stone can be reinterpreted in this way, then what does that mean for the thousands of other objects displayed in museums far from their homelands? How many of them are more than curiosities, carrying within them stories of propaganda, conquest, and displacement? Hawass's revelations about the stone thus ripple outward, inviting a reevaluation of global heritage itself. What emerges, ultimately, is a picture of the Rosetta Stone as an object that refuses to be silent. It speaks in 3 scripts across centuries, through empires and museums. It speaks of power, propaganda, knowledge, and possession. And now, through Hawass's revelations, it speaks of reclamation. The truth he revealed is that the stone is not a finished story, but a living one, demanding attention, interpretation, and justice. By giving voice to these truths, Hawass ensured that the Rosetta Stone will never again be viewed in the same way. It will no longer be just a curiosity behind glass, but a reminder of the enduring power of history to unsettle, provoke, and inspire. The stone, through his words, has reclaimed its voice, and in hearing it, we too are called to listen differently, to see differently, and to confront the truths that have long been hidden in plain sight. When Zahi Hawass set the Rosetta Stone into focus with his revelations, one of the subtler yet profound aspects he emphasized was the human dimension behind the slab. For too long, the Rosetta Stone has been spoken of as an object, as though its creation, transport, and preservation happened in a vacuum. But Hawass reminded audiences that behind each chiseled word and behind every moment of its journey lay individuals, priests who carved its decree, soldiers who unearthed it, scholars who puzzled over its inscriptions, and curators who displayed it. Each of these people had motives, ambitions, and constraints, and in recognizing their roles, the stone becomes more than an artifact. It becomes a story about the choices of human beings across centuries. Hawass brought to light how the priesthood of Memphis, who issued the decree, were not simply agents of the king, but intermediaries negotiating between ruler and ruled. They benefited from the arrangement, for by extolling Ptolemy V, they secured their own position within the kingdom. The decree carved into the Rosetta Stone elevated the king, but in doing so, it also elevated the priesthood's relevance. The stone, therefore, reveals a relationship between state and religious elites, showing how power is shared and reinforced through mutual dependency. This truth reframes it not just as propaganda for one figure, but as a document safeguarding the hierarchy of a complex society. When the stone was rediscovered by Napoleon's men in 1799, another set of individuals entered the narrative. Hawass recounted how these soldiers, engaged in military conquest, suddenly stumbled upon a relic of incalculable significance. Their interest was not born of cultural reverence, but of opportunism. They knew that every find could serve Napoleon's ambition to outshine the British both militarily and intellectually. To them, the stone was initially a spoil, one among many objects to be cataloged and transported. This aspect underlines how chance and circumstance can shape the fate of even the most consequential artifacts. Had the stone been overlooked, had it been shattered or discarded in the dust of Rashid, the history of decipherment, and perhaps the entire field of Egyptology, would have unfolded differently. The British, in turn, did not view the stone as mere basalt either. For them, it was a political symbol of victory over the French. Hawass reminded his listeners that the stone changed hands as part of a treaty, not as part of any scientific collaboration. Its transfer was a diplomatic act of dominance, designed to demonstrate Britain's superiority. From the start, its presence in London was bound to national pride. Its exhibition meant to signal that Britain, not France, held the key to the mysteries of Egypt. In that moment, the stone's meaning shifted again. It was no longer just a decree or a spoil of war, but a trophy of imperial competition. Hawass highlighted that in each stage of its life, the Rosetta Stone has been reframed by those who possessed it. For the Egyptians of Ptolemy's time, it was reassurance. For Napoleon's men, it was evidence of conquest. For the British, it was a demonstration of imperial stewardship. None of these perspectives were neutral. Each reflected the priorities of its holders, reshaping the stone's role according to the needs of the moment. This is one of the most profound truths Hawass exposed. Artifacts never exist in isolation, but are always mediated by human intentions. One of the more unexpected insights Hawass offered concerned the materiality of the stone itself. Beyond the words, he asked audiences to consider the basalt as an object, its weight, its dark surface, its durability. He reminded people that the choice of stone was intentional. Basalt was not a random medium. It was prized for its strength and permanence. By inscribing their decree into such material, the priests and rulers ensured its longevity. It was designed to last, to survive generations, and in that sense, it fulfilled its mission. More than 2,000 years later, the stone endures. Not as a fragile parchment or a crumbled wall inscription, but as a robust slab. Hawass's emphasis on its physicality reinforced the idea that the creators of the decree wanted their message to echo across ages, even if they never imagined how far it would travel. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Zahi Hawass revealing shocking Rosetta Stone truths today? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.